think it would also be fair to say that like CEA 20 or CTA 2010 is a really good way to wrap your brain around DSP limiters?
Oh, hell yeah.
Because that was the takeaway from me when you taught me how to do CTA 2010. It was like, oh, I finally get DSP limiters. Like on a functional level, I finally get them. You know, that was more than anything for me. It was like, okay, that's an aspect that I don't think I would have been able to truly grok any other way. So
yeah, you can see how the stuff works, and you can understand what you're hearing. And so, before we went on, Aaron was talking about distortion, and being able, you hear so many people talk about distortion, like, oh yeah, the problem with this is distortion, and it almost never is.
Right.
It's usually something else. Okay, but they hear something and they think, oh, it's distortion. But then if you do a test like that, or you run some other distortion measurements, you can start to understand what's really happening. And I've had so many people say, like, you know what, the difference in headphone sound, it's distortion, and they are wrong. It's with the difference in subwoofers, kind of a lot of it's distortion, right? But like, you don't really encounter distortion in a normal speaker system and a normal amplifier, and in any kind of a normal system, you're just not getting that much distortion. And by the way, the distortion doesn't really happen except when you're cranked,
right?
And maybe we should explain what the CEA 2010 is. And I know Aaron has to get in on that because you've done your fair share.
No. I'm never doing another one again.
I have not, because I'm here in California, Brent. I've been to your previous house, and maybe you had a quiet area, but in LA, you can testify. Where's it quiet? Like if I go outside, it's just cars.
Oh, well,
there's not a ton of quiet places.
It's hard in Alabama too. Like the last time I tried to do CTA 2010, I just pulled out an SPL meter and measured the sound of the cicadas.
Oh, yeah, man.
Decibels.
Yeah.
92 decibels just standing out in the yard holding an SPL meter.
Yeah. That's no joke. And then when you were doing it, it was probably summertime, and it was probably at night because you thought, oh, I'm going to dodge the heat. And you were still just sweating your stuff off, right?
Yeah.
I've been there.
But, you can, the cool thing about it is that you can actually see, you're supposed to have a 50 dB SPL, noise floor, ideally. However, if you repeat the measurement and average them, for every doubling of the number of measurements you have, you get a 3 dB improvement in noise floor. Right. So most of the people that do it will do like 4. I usually do 4. If I have a bad, up here, as opposed to LA, I live pretty close to a hospital, and sometimes the ventilation system gets a little loud sometimes, and I'll just increase the number of what I call burps, because it goes whoom, 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 right?
Yeah.
I just increase the number of burps to improve my SM ratio, and then also it's all on an RTA, so you can see it. So like if an airplane flies over, right? You can see that a lot of airplanes like Cessnas have like about 120 hertz whoomp. And you can just see it right there. There's no question, like, gosh, is this messing with my measurement? I mean, you can just see it in the measurement. There's no question about it. So it's actually pretty easy to do. And if you have a moderately quiet backyard, honestly, Dr. Sue from Sue Research was the first one. I had started doing it just by reading the original paper on it, which was really definitely didn't spell things out adequately. There's a lot of confusion in the beginning of it. And so Dr. Sue said, hey, we're getting different results from you. But he had been taught to do it by Don Keel, who's the guy who kind of invented it. And he said, you want to come over? And, Sue is over in LA. So I drove over there, and he showed me, he had a significantly noisier environment than me because he was near a freeway, but he still didn't have any problem. And once I switched a couple of things over and did it more his and Don Keel's way, my results basically just matched his.
Wow.
So so it's not that hard, and that's just such a robust measurement. It's not like frequency response is so much harder to do.
Yeah, it's
so
actually
maybe we need to explain what we're talking about with the CEA 2010, because we're just going in and talking about it. I'm sure there are folks who are like, what is this?
I mean,
Okay.
I mean, CA 2010, California, like what, 13 years ago? Is that what we're talking about?
It is. It kind of. I don't think 2010 had anything to do with it, but the date. I think it just happened to be the number that happened, and it happened to. The whole thing happened right around 2010. So what happens is with subwoofers, right? You. One of the really easy things you can do to sort of cheat if you're a manufacturer is put a bass boost in it, right? So if you measure it, if you close mic a subwoofer, if you measure it like close in, you can, if you EQ it, you'll get a bass bump at low volume levels, right? But once you turn it up, either the driver or the amp or something's going to give out, or it's going to distort, or who knows what, right? So a lot of manufacturers were kind of cheating and putting that little bump in there so that all the people that measured just a frequency response at low level were getting, oh, it's flat down to 15 hertz or something, which no. But then once you actually crank it, you realize it didn't have any output at 15 hertz. So CEA 2010 was created to get past that. And it's based on the work of Don Keel and Siegfried Linkwitz, and Tom Nussain at Sound and Vision was doing kind of like an early sort of a little bit seat of the pants version of it. But the idea is that the distortion in subwoofers has so much to do with the sound quality, and you don't really realize it's distorting because it doesn't sound like right, like we think of distortion sounding.
Yeah.
It sounds more like I'm not that good of a subwoofer distortion imitator, but. And it also can just be like a lack of clarity and a lack of punch because the sub is not giving you that what it's supposed to do. It's kind of behaving really sort of chaotically. So, but once you have so anyway, with CEA 2010, what you do is you start at a frequency. Let's say it's 25 hertz or something, right? And you keep increasing the level, and then you have an RTA display that shows you the fundamental. Let's see if I can do this backwards. The fundamental, right, which is your 25 hertz, and then it shows the distortion harmonic. So you'll see the next distortion harmonic at 50 hertz, 75, 100, and on down the line. And there are thresholds for each of those, like the second harmonic at 50 hertz for a 25 hertz tone it has to be no higher than minus 10 dB below the fundamental. If it's any higher than that, you're over the threshold, and so you kind of keep raising the level until you're right under the thresholds for all those distortion harmonics. And then whatever the level the fundamental is, 100 decibels or something like that, you record that. And then you do it for the standard only mandates 6 frequencies, but a lot of people, like Gene Delasala at Audioholics, I think goes down to 12.5 hertz or something. And it's in third octave steps. So it's 20, 25, 31.5, 40, 50, and 63. But I find that those 6 frequencies tell me pretty much everything I need to know.
Well, that sounds familiar, huh, Chana? Those numbers. That's what we're using on our disc.
Oh, yeah.
But, so if I were to simplify it, it sounds like we're trying to get an idea of, what frequencies can this subwoofer play realistically? Like at a volume where it's not sounding like garbage. Like, it can make that sound, but if it's all distortion, then it's not really doing it in a practical way. So this is a good test to see, like, is it actually performing at 16 hertz without all kinds of distortion? Seems like that's what it's.
And you find that once you get these sort of monster subs from SVS or Power Sound or Sue or somebody like that, you start to hear how much better those sound than the little subs, and you start to realize what's going on there. And the distortion is really the problem because so many of those subs have some output at 20 hertz or 25, but a sub with like really solid output at 20 hertz just sounds awesome, and not just from the shake, just from the punch,
punch. Yeah.
And somebody here saying it's not distortion, just he just said. But I think what you were saying is that bass distortion is pretty easy to to hear. If it's port chuffing, if it's hitting the limit of the excursion and the thing slamming against the magnet, that's pretty audible.
Well, okay, now those are also that's the funnest part of CTH 2010 is you're pushing these subwoofers past their limits by definition. You have to push them past their limits. And it's designed, the burp tones it's a 6.5 cycle windowed tone. So it's like a sine wave that looks like, right? And so they don't really damage the subwoofer. I don't think I've ever had one. I think maybe like one time I had a sub that was damaged by it, but it had some defect and it blew up. So, but you're pushing.
I've had them go into fault protect mode though.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you're kind of pushing it past the limit. And that's where you start to get some of that chuffing and where you start to get the mechanical noises. That's one of the problems with the standard is those actually don't show up as distortion harmonics.
Oh, wow.
Really?
So you have to listen to it and kind of judge, like, is that any level of banging to me is obviously unacceptable because then that's so different from what the subwoofer is supposed to sound like. But chuffing, you got it because you're going to hear a little of it. It's like how much is acceptable to you? That's still subjective, and that's up to the operator to.
But Brent, if it's musical chuffing though, it's just musical.
There's I will say there are some audiophile subs that are kind of marketed to audiophiles that are touted as being musical that do pretty poorly on CTA 2010.
Why are you laughing over
really
there,
poorly?
Don't drop any names. I see you wanting to. You stay. You just
and
chill.
then you start to realize how much. That's when you just start to realize that there's just people can make crap and label it however they want to and sell it by saying it's more musical and.
It's faster, Brent.
It's not. Sorry.
It's fast.
Oh, it's fast, right?
Yeah.
It's fast. As fast as subwoofer I've ever heard.
Pace and rhythm on that sub. Aaron, come on, man.
I have a question, Brent. I have a question for you. Do subwoofers have inner detail?
Only if they're very tiny and do very poorly on CTA 2010, and if they get, I was going to say if they get good reviews, and I was going to name a publication,
but we can't edit it out.
That's what y'all edit out. Okay.
They edit out the smack talk. Okay, I get it.
Sometimes
I get it.
If they are. Well,
if they're chocolatey, if the subwoofers are chocolatey.
This is why I say, you know what? Look, CTA 2010 is the gold standard. If someone does that, they understand subwoofers. And I'm not saying you can't understand subwoofers if you don't do that. Sound of Vision had a guy named David Vaughn. I don't know if he's still writing, but God, I read his reviews in Sound of Vision. They read just like mine, except they didn't have measurements. Like he knew what was going on. He heard it. And, so you can, but it's just kind of so many of these guys get fooled by marketing or by, they think a big sub is necessarily slow and unmusical and it's for home theater and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
yes.
The texture and tone, and what is
the texture? That's a great one.
Bass texture, is it?
Well, so I think some of this stuff
crunchy.
It can be explained in measurement terms, But what do I hear a lot? Texture and tone, and the thing just disappears, or like the bass hits and then it goes away real fast. Something. I hear those types of things, and I'm like,
no other speaker does that.
I'm like, well, okay, it goes away fast. Okay, that has to do with how it interacts with the room. Okay, and then texture and tone, like maybe if it's a flatter response, then what I've noticed is people like, oh, there's more texture. Yeah, because all of them sound, you can hear the differences. If you have a big old peak at 60 hertz, well, yeah, it's gonna draw attention to itself. But when it's all even, I didn't notice that there were these different notes. I'm like, yeah, it's a flat response. Is
that so if someone says there's a different texture to the bass with the subwoofer, it could that we then equate that to a better frequency response and no big peaks? Is that do we have to decipher what's going on?
I would guess, and y'all, I would like it if you chime in. I would guess that if people are talking about the texture of a subwoofer, they are talking about stuff that is happening above the crossover point from your main speakers.
Okay.
Because all that comes out of the subwoofer, and this is why I get so annoyed.
It's something we can't necessarily hear, right?
The thing is, like, the subwoofer is basically reproducing fundamental tones, and people are like, "Oh, there's all these harmonics coming out of the subwoofer." I'm like, "Not unless it's distortion." Ideally, nothing should come out of your subwoofer above 80 hertz or whatever your crossover point is, right? So if something's coming out of your subwoofer that's higher than that, that's wrong. And everything should be piped into your main speakers and coming out of that, and that's where you start to hear the detail of the bassist, the subtleties of the bassist fingering and plucking and things like that, and the sort of moi sound that like moi that Jaco Pastorius has, and so I think that the vast majority of the character of the bass is coming out of the main speakers, in my personal view.
Yeah. All right. If you would like to join us every week on Mondays at what time is it? About 6 p.m. Central, which is the best time. That's where I am. Make sure you join us at youtube.com/Daily HiFi. We out.